Empty ghost apartments are the reason that rent is so high. At least, that's what some people are saying.
The city's in a state right now where people cannot afford to pay their bills.
We need to keep organizing as tenants. We need to keep on fighting to make sure that we have a New York that can actually support working families.
When I say ghost, I'm not talking about your friend Casper. What I'm talking about is something a lot less haunted, but probably just as scary. But before we can talk about why owners have so many ghost apartments, we should probably talk about what exactly is a ghost apartment and how it could cause you to pay a much higher rent price. First, what exactly is a ghost apartment? All over the country, we have apartment buildings for people to live in, especially in major cities. And the idea is simple. An owner builds a building with 100 apartments to provide housing for 100 families. However, very rarely are these buildings 100% occupied. Sometimes that's by design and sometimes that's by luck. Either way, whether it's done on purpose or not, people still need somewhere to live, and that's why they're upset. Because these buildings with empty, abandoned, vacant apartments that no one is living in is taking inventory away from people looking for housing and causing rent prices to go higher. Which leads us into our next question. How could an empty, vacant apartment possibly cause rent prices to go up? And this is where things get interesting. Let's say you have a building with 10 apartments and there's 10 families looking for housing, but 5 of those apartments have already been rented, which means there's 5 apartments remaining, or 1 apartment for every 2 families. Now, this is a pretty normal situation, but what happens when 2 of those apartments are taken off the market? You then have those 10 families going from a 50% chance of getting an apartment to now having a 30% chance, and that's how rent prices increase. While decreasing the chances of a family getting an apartment, you've also increased the demand and the competition. It becomes a basic law of supply and demand. People are now willing to spend more for a product or service that they wouldn't otherwise have to because there's less of it available. And unfortunately, housing is one of those things that is a necessity because you have to live somewhere. So this begs the question, why would a landlord have empty apartments? On the surface, it doesn't look like it makes much sense, especially on paper. Why keep an apartment empty when you can rent it out and collect money from it every single month? It would be like having a supermarket and the shelves empty but having product in the back in the stock room. And this is where things differ in housing, because this presents the opportunity to make more money, and I'll explain how. Let's revisit the example from earlier. Let's say the 5 out of 10 apartments are going for $1,000 per month, but because they took 2 of those empty apartments off the market and there's only 3 remaining for the 10 families, instead of charging the $1,000 per month that they were before, they can charge $1,200 because the demand has increased and the supply has went down. But that's just the first step. Because they have a lot more eyes looking at the apartments now, once those 3 $1,200 apartments are fully rented, they could bring back one of the 2 empty apartments, and instead of charging $1,200, they could charge $1,400. Because there's no inventory left, they have a bunch of families looking, and this is the only thing that's available. Now, when you look at the math, instead of them renting out 10 apartments at $1,000 per month and getting $10,000 for the month, they have now rented out 9 apartments and they're still getting the same $10,000 a month with 1 empty apartment to work with. Now it brings us to the final step. When the leases are up for the $1,000 apartments, they can now renew at a much higher rate because their ceiling has become $1,400. So even if they offer the apartment at a discount at $1,300 or $1,250, they're still making more profit. And the same thing goes for the $1,200 apartments when they renew those leases, because they still have an empty apartment to work with, so they can control the comps of what the new leases will become and just do this repeating cycle all over again as long as the market supports it and maintain high rents. But I must add, there are additional reasons for a landlord to have empty ghost apartments besides trying to get more money. And the most simplest one is they simply can't afford it. Now, as someone who's been in this position themselves, I remember when a tenant had not paid rent in 4 years. And when they finally did decide to leave, they caused over $100,000 worth of damages. That's a lot of money for someone to find to renovate an apartment. So if they don't have it, what do? Or what can they do? Leave it vacant. The other reason is because the ROI simply doesn't make sense financially. If you're going to spend $100,000 to renovate this apartment, how long will it take that owner to get the $100,000 back? And that's the number one thing that most landlords and owners are looking at, the rate of return on their money. This is also very common in rent-regulated buildings in major cities such as LA or New York City. The amount that you can increase the rent is capped at a certain percentage, meaning that no matter how much money you put into the renovation, you can only raise the rent so much. So they could put a ton of money into the renovation, but it doesn't mean they recoup it. So in their eyes, it doesn't make sense to do the renovation because they won't get their ROI. So what do? Leave it vacant. Whenever a tenant leaves an apartment, there's gonna always be some sort of turnover, even if it's just paint. And the amount of money required for the renovation could put you in a worse financial position than if you were to leave it vacant. And that leads us to where we are today. Empty ghost apartments and higher rents. But that's all for today. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video. Peace.